Okay, into the plowing. My name is Stacy-Marie Ishmael. I'm the managing editor for mobile news at BuzzFeed. So I'm going to take this opportunity to disagree with John Steinberg as the person who Jonah and Ben hired to solve notifications for BuzzFeed. A couple of quick things about the conversations around how media organizations approach notifications. And the first is that in as much as we're discussing in this room all of the infrastructure, the layers, the platforms around enabling notifications, what most newsrooms are contending with is significantly less sophisticated from the actual ability to send something than what most of you have either access to or have custom built. And in most newsrooms, if they even have a mobile app, and if that app is able to send push notifications, there is often no single person who is responsible, who owns that. Somebody asked, do you have somebody who's responsible for sending push notifications? In some places, that person is the same person who's responsible for sending the tweet, updating the Facebook page, sending the email. At BuzzFeed, we have the resources where I have an entire team of people responsible exclusively for populating our mobile presence and for sending those push notifications, but most newsrooms don't have that luxury. So on to the second point, which is that the newsrooms who are sending these notifications and are doing so in a way that is relatively unsophisticated from the perspective of all the variables that you've discussed, most of them have no ability to know even what time zone somebody is in, much less what they're doing at the time that somebody interacts with that. And so the fallback is on a super old school thing called news judgment. Right? What do we think is the most interesting, important thing happening in the world right now that, given what we assume or can extrapolate to what our audience is worth interrupting whatever they're doing at this point in time? And then the third is based on that, given that they have almost no ability to know who and what and when somebody is interacting with that thing, they also have very little ability to get any information back about how that thing was received. Right, so I work for one of the most sophisticated companies in the world, and we are fighting a daily battle with Urban Airship, reporting or not reporting, as it bloody well feels like, on how many people have opted into different categories of notifications that we're sending. And so when we were discussing this context of what should news organizations do with notifications, the first is to focus a little bit less on the idea of a notification as being the thing that flashes up on your home screen, and more, and here to agree with John, around what are the different ways that somebody wants to find out that a thing is happening that they possibly care about, right? So right now, a lot of newsrooms are dealing with yet another shooting, this time at a community college. They have protocols for getting this into place. I've received 7 push notifications, including 2 from my team about this. But I'm a person who has 7 news apps on her phone, right? Most of our audiences have none to possibly 1. Most of our audiences are either possibly reading that notification via email, possibly getting it by social, and much more likely Facebook versus Twitter, or even just encountering it because they are somewhere where there's a television screen or a radio in the background.
It's number 1 thing on Facebook right now.
Good job on them finally sorting out their trending algorithm for news. And so one of the things I would like to sort of introduce some perspective on in this conversation is that as a technology community, when we talk about notifications, we get really bogged down in the technical details of what is capable for a percentage of power users who know that you can swipe on a notification to interact with it, who have installed alternative keyboards in order to be able to take advantage of the features of those phones. But most news audiences in most places, in most countries, are not us. Right, and we have to optimize for not the lowest common denominator, but the average consumer of what we're trying to do. And what we are able to do to them, what we're able to deliver to them is much less fun than what we would like to from that perspective. So that's how we think about notifications in news. Thanks.
Okay, Gilad is coming up.
Hey guys, I'm just going to hang out here because I have some slides and notes. I'm Gilad. I do data science at betaworks. I work with all the companies here on different data problems. It's a lot of fun. And what I want to talk to you, or to do with you today, is a 2-hour session on Fourier transforms. right, to identify trends. That's the plan, right?
That's
2 hours? Yeah. Oh, no, 20 minutes. Oops.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go through it fast. So let's see if these slides work. Maybe they do. Do I press the big green? Yes. Okay, so we're going to talk about some event detection stuff, dive into some techniques that are commonly used, show you some data, some social data that we use, and then how we use Slack to train some of our algorithms to do it. So luckily, the setup today was great. I don't have to talk about all these sort of cautions with this power now to push notifications to users to effectively say, look at this thing now. The more we do it, the more dangerous it becomes. If we don't do it well, it harms everyone, right? Will the tragedy of the commons play out, or will sort of Apple help make things better? I think we hear John in the background. So the promise to sort of make things better also brings with it this idealization of data, right? We just use Mr. Big Data, and everything will be so much better. We'll bring sort of context-aware, really smart, timely notifications. We'll know exactly what the user is doing, and there's some truth to that, right? Like, look at what Dennis was showing us. Like if we have sort of all these techniques, if we have all this information about user behavior, if we've been mining it for years, there's some incredible stuff that we could do, but it's really, 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 really hard. So you have to like solely focus on it, build this system. They have like hundreds of engineers, all this data that they've been crunching, and then you're starting to maybe be able to do it. If you're Google, you can maybe do it, but if you're sort of a small startup that doesn't have a lot of access to resources, it's much, much, much harder. There's also if you do it well, there's that creep factor, right? You have to start training your users that, no, I'm actually trying to, I have the system, you've been giving me all this information, I'm trying to make recommendations. So the thing with all this data is it lets us do predictions on sort of large groups of people, and that works really well, but when we drill down to the single person, it's also much, much, much harder. Because I'm sure it's not surprising to you, like, people aren't always rational, right? Especially when it comes to emotions. I may be standing around outside this restaurant, not because I'm about to sort of sit and eat in here, it's because I'm having sort of a breakup session with my partner, right? And now that, the future, when Foursquare is going to recommend this place to me because I've been here before, that's going to go terribly wrong, right? So it's not always that simple, right? People do things for many different reasons. In aggregate, things tend to work out, quite nicely. When you work with data, on the personal level, it's much, much, much harder. So as a data person, I like to put things on axes and organize stuff. So bear with me here. I chose sort of 2 parameters that we'll play with. On the left side, we have Anna. She's the managing editor at Dig. Don't tell her she's on these slides. She already thinks I'm here to take over her job, meaning build the algorithms that will take over her job. So she leads the editorial at Dig. She sort of has a team of editors. They push stuff to the website, push notifications. On the right side, we have our robot overlords. We have this sort of really smart system that understands where we are, understands our context, knows exactly what we want at the right time, right? So this is one of the axes we'll be playing with. The other axis is sort of unicast to broadcast, right? So sending a single message to a specific person, a personalized message, effectively, and then a broadcast, a message to lots of people, right? So thinking of like types of apps and types of notifications, on the left side we have sort of on the bottom part, all the social media sites and messaging apps, right? A user takes specific action, right? It's a human taking an action, or somebody following, somebody putting up a video, somebody liking our stuff, somebody texting us or sending us a message. So these are very common, and they generate a lot of engagement too. At the top, we have more on the broadcast side, so obviously they're breaking news. But there are some of these sort of dumb notifications, as Matt was mentioning before, like Best Buy. It's like, deal of the day. And then the next day, it's deal of the day, right? Nothing smart about it. It's just there's a deal. So if we take it so let's jump to the next level, where we're trying to do things a little more sort of in a smart manner. So on the broadcast side, we're asking users for what they're interested in. So BuzzFeed is like, all right, which vertical are you interested in? Do you want sports? Do you want entertainment? And you could subscribe to that. And when there's an important story, they send it to you within that vertical. Right? A little smarter. ESPN does the same thing. On the bottom side, Guilt tries to sort of understand which deal would be interesting for you. And then Runkeeper, based on your past behavior, oh, you ran last week at this time, why don't you run again right now? So it's not that smart, really. It doesn't know what you're doing. If you're like feeding a baby that just woke up, it has no idea. Like, why don't you run? I wish I could run, but I'm here with this baby. So the next step that we take is sort of trying to be much, much, much smarter. There's much more sort of less signal coming from the user, so less understanding of intent. The user doesn't tell us exactly what they're interested in, but we're trying to infer that, right? So Amazon, based on a user's previous actions, previous purchases, can tell us, well, here's a thing that popped up that you may be interested in, right? Dig Deeper, as Andrew was mentioning, looks at people you follow on Twitter. Nuzzle does the same, and then sends you important things that you may find interesting because lots of the people you follow are posting that out. And on the broadcast side, we have services like Smart News and Banjo. Banjo is a location-aware news app that identifies sort of trending things in your area, right? And then on the far right side are these sort of, this is the promise, where we have things like Google Now, we have obviously Foursquare, where the user doesn't necessarily have to provide anything. Right? The app sort of runs in the background. The app sort of leverages multiple data sources and makes these really interesting leaps based on sort of all this understanding that it has of the user, of the ecosystem. So I would argue that we're sort of, the narrative pushes us to the right, to that direction. As developers, we should all go smarter. We should all use sort of a lot of data, be context aware, and try to get as much data about users and do these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they're not for everyone. I would say they're really, really, really hard. And what we found is there's a lot of like place in the middle, like a lot of really interesting, valuable things we could do right there in the middle, where we're not trying to create sort of these smart AI objects. We're not trying to fully understand users' context, but with the information that we have, we can provide them value at the right time. So typically that comes down to trend analysis, right? So we say, well, if we sort of have all these signals, these data signals, we have to find what is important, right? And so I asked you, like, which one of these, and you may not be able to see the hashtags, but these two events are playing out at the same time. Which is more important, right? As an editor, you may have one idea. As an app developer, you may have another idea. But typically, if we try to think about data signals, we try to say, well, if we can model these two events as a function, so sort of see how it's playing out in terms of, could be, because these are media objects, it could be reads, it could be shares, it just activity, engagement around the story. Like, how do we say that one is sort of more important at the moment than the other, right? And typically, there are two things we come back to. We say, well, something more timely, right? We're interested in things that are more recent. If Kim Kardashian got married 2 months ago, that's probably less important than the refugee crisis that's happening right now. If it happens at the same time, that's different. But we also get to this notion of deviation from some norm, right? Or from some expected value, right? So we say, well, typically when an article from the Huffington Post comes out, this is how it plays out. Or typically when the New York Times writes about something in their sports section, this is how it looks like. So we have this understanding of what normal behavior and expected behavior is like. And then we can start to measure, well, how does it look like when things deviate from that norm, right? From that model that we have. And this doesn't have to be a story, right? These are my examples because that's a lot of what we do here. But it can be foot traffic, as Dennis was saying before. So let's look at some examples. We do a lot of social data analysis here. This is Twitter. So what we tend to see with social data are these diurnal patterns, so these daily ups and downs, and you see that all over the place with data that comes from humans, right? People go to sleep, people are much more active during the day, right? That makes sense. So here we're comparing tweets with the word Starbucks, coffee, morning, tired. Obviously, there are more people sort of mentioning or referencing the morning in the morning. More people are saying they're tired in the evening, right? That makes sense. This data kind of reflects us in our cycles. Here's something interesting where we're comparing hangover, party, and beer, right? So we can all figure out when the weekend is happening, right? So as there's sort of an increase in the number of posts about parties, the strange thing is that beer stays pretty consistent, right, at the same level, which is actually not as expected. Notice those two spikes in hangovers, Saturday morning and Sunday morning, right? So this gives us an idea for how what the expected value should be, right? There's a weekly cycle, there's a daily cycle. Here's another very clear one. This is just language-based. So posts in English in green versus Japanese and Spanish. Based on time zones, the peaks are at different places, but there's a very clear spike there, which is was a massive football game. Right? So lots of activity, and that's a clear sort of trend. There's something that deviates from our expected value. Here's a different data set. This is iTunes chart rankings, right? So we look at that a lot, and we take sort of daily samples of what are the top apps on all the different iTunes ranks, and this compares the Bible app, the Kindle app, Gmail, and Dropbox. And you'll see that there are, weekly fluctuations, right? The Bible app gets much more engagement and downloads in the weekends, obviously, like Sunday is the peak, where Gmail gets the lowest. Right, so we have these weekly cycles in all these data sets around human activity. This is the Uber, the same sort of mapping for Uber positioning. So the higher the point on the graph, the lower the rank is for that app. So note that towards the end of December, Uber dips down, right? Because during Christmas, apparently people engage with the app significantly less. Right? But otherwise, we have a clear sort of understanding of what's expected of engagement around Uber. Right? So this is sort of how we build these models using this data that's available in so many places. And a lot of this data is public. Like anyone can access this information. So one method, and there are many methods to do this, we use time series decomposition, where effectively it's a fancy way of saying, let's break this sort of trend down into a few of its different components. So if what we're analyzing is the top trend, there's a cyclical part, as you've seen in all the other graphs, right? There's a daily or weekly cycle, but there's also a general trend, like we saw with the Bible app. Like the Bible actually does really poorly in the summer, but then towards Christmas, that's its strongest point, right? So it has a yearly cycle too. So we look at these trends, the yearly, the daily, the hourly, the weekly, and we almost subtract them from the signal. And then we get the residuals, which is at the bottom, and then using some statistics, we say, well, what is significant here, right? What of the stuff that we're seeing is actually important? And as we work on this, as we tweak this, we find the sort of important things in real time, right, or important events from our data. So we've been playing with this a lot within sort of different applications at Betaworks, and just to give you a few concrete examples, this is a new company that we're incubating at Betaworks called Scale Model. It listens to aggregate information from communities. And so this is one of our favorite communities. It's the animal lovers community, and this is like all the stuff they're sharing. It's ranked by user centrality within the network. And what we managed to find was that, they really care about World Elephant Day, the animal lovers community. This is based all on public information. And so we managed to, understand what the seasonal and trend lines are, but then figure out that, this thing is happening and it's probably important for the community, and we sent the notification sort of before the peak at that time. So we thought that was pretty valuable for that community. What we've been doing, though, is in order to train the system and sort of debug it, we've been sending a lot of these notification alerts to Slack. So we have all these dedicated Slack channels that the data team and then editors use to sort of look at the output of the algorithm if before we had to have everyone go to a different, like a URL that's really long and nasty and say, well, go here to see the results. Well, now we just send this information to Slack, and everyone can sort of look and see whether they like the results or not. There's even, you can upvote or downvote the trend to say, yes, this is actually a good trend, or no. And this helps us refine our methods and our thresholds, so to make the notifications much better. So these are from the US politics community, where we're seeing sort of hashtags that are emerging in real time, and we're getting notified to our Slack channel. We're doing the same with dig editors. This is the trend sort of channel within our dig sort of Slack environment. And again, we're sending things that are up and rising, and all the editors hang out on this is one of the chat rooms they hang out on, but then they sort of see what's worthwhile to pick up. Their scores associated with each. So to wrap up, well, there's this incredible, opportunity with really sort of some complex, amazing sort of data magic. What was on the right side of that chart that I showed you, we think there's still this really, really great opportunity to find value in the middle, to find value where you can sort of have a good understanding of what is important, what is a trend, what is an outlier, but then also have sort of some editors in the loop deciding, well, helping train the system, but also deciding, is this worthwhile to highlight or to send out as a notification. And lastly, I just want to say, as someone who's been sort of doing trend analysis for a while, I have one major concern, is that when we were on the web, we could hold some of these systems accountable. Some of these algorithmic systems, like Twitter's trending topic algorithm, like Facebook's trends algorithm, there are APIs, there are ways for us to get at that data, track it over time, and really hold them accountable. Like, why is your system not highlighting these important trends? And many people have done that. I don't know what the equivalent of that is when it's in people's pockets, when it's personalized, and when it's on the phones, when there are effectively no APIs for that. So thanks for listening.
Any questions, talk to Gilad directly. We're running about 15 minutes behind, which is, I know this is pretty dense. We wanted to make it that way.